Diabetes Connections is brought to you by One Touch. Every touch is a step forward. By Dexcom, take control of your diabetes and live life to the fullest with Dexcom. By No Foods, no grain, no gluten, no guilt. And by Audible, listening is the new reading.
This is Diabetes Connections with Stacey Sims.
This week, you're hearing a lot right now about children with diabetes, Friends for Life. Maybe you're even traveling there now. It is the largest family diabetes conference in the world. But how did it start? And why do people keep going back? You'll hear from the founder of the whole event. Plus, the Facebook group is asking me questions. Not all of them are about diabetes. We'll get a little personal this week. This podcast is not intended as medical advice. If you have those kinds of questions, please contact your healthcare provider. Welcome to another week of the show. I'm so glad you could join us. If you're new to the program, we aim to educate and inspire about type 1 diabetes by sharing stories of connection, talking to the movers and shakers in our communities, the bloggers and authors and speakers, the celebrities, the athletes who have type 1 diabetes, as well as the healthcare companies and the tech folks that are pushing things along. I love talking to what I call, everyday people, in quotes, people just living with diabetes. My son was diagnosed with type 1 just before he turned 2. I don't have diabetes. My husband does have type 2, but I have a background in radio and television and local news, and that's how you get the podcast. I am very fortunate to be attending Friends for Life once again. I've been able to go almost every year for the past 4 or 5 years. I skip here and there as the family calendar comes first. And there are often other obligations. Some are so busy. But I thought it would be really fun to replay a little bit of an interview I did 3 years ago now with Laura Billetdeaux. She is the Vice President of Education and Programs for Children with Diabetes. And this whole thing started, and if you're not familiar with Friends for Life, it's huge. There's about 3,000 people that go every year. I mean, you've got attendees, you've got vendors, all of the big diabetes companies are there. And this all started because Laura wanted to meet some of the people that were on the CWD, the Children with Diabetes, message boards. Yep. Friends for Life, Children with Diabetes predates what we think of as social media now. It was all chat rooms. In the olden days, kids gather around. But really, there was no Facebook, there was no Instagram, there were no smartphones when Children with Diabetes message boards, and many message boards, were out there in the 90s. It's funny to think about that and how far we've come. If you are on Facebook, I know many of you listen right through Facebook, please take a second and click over to join the Facebook group. We do fun things. This is, as you can see this week, this is where I'm getting a lot of questions that I'm going to be answering a little bit later on. It's also where I chose contestants for the game show that I'm doing at Friends for Life, and I will tell you more about that in just a little bit. But first, Diabetes Connections is brought to you by Dexcom. One of the best features of the Dexcom G5 and now G6 mobile are the customizable alerts and alarms. On the G5, customizable threshold alerts provide advance warning of hypo and hyperglycemic events before they happen. With the G6, there is a new alert. It's a predictive low, and it predicts hypoglycemia even before it hits to avoid dangerous low blood sugar events. Pretty cool stuff. And we found over the last few years of using Dexcom that all the alerts help Benny, when he's distracted. At this age, he is basically distracted all of the time. He is 13. And it's so great to troubleshoot, mostly with him, high blood sugars before they get too high. But of course, we also catch lows before they get too low. I love that the Dexcom will alert him if he needs to take action. And overnights, talk about peace of mind. I can't imagine using a continuous glucose monitoring system without alarms. It just wouldn't work for us. Find out more about the Dexcom continuous glucose monitoring system at diabetes-connections.com and click on the Dexcom logo. Laura Billetdeaux was one of my first guests here on the podcast, stopping by just over 3 years ago to talk about that year's Friends for Life conference. I will link up the full interview at diabetes-connections.com. You can check it out in the show notes. What you're going to hear are a few clips from that interview in 2015. Laura is the VP of Children with Diabetes Education and Programs. She has planned every Friends for Life conference. Her children, Sam and Caroline, are grown now, and they come back to help out at the conference whenever they can. Sam was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes in 1998 when he was 8 years old, and that's what led Laura to the Children with Diabetes chat boards, one of the first out there. And the following year, some people on that board in the messaging groups, they wanted to get together. They wanted to meet up in person, maybe for vacation and have some fun. And Laura said, I can do that. And that's where we pick up the interview. What were you thinking in 1999? What were you thinking would happen?
Well, I honestly had no idea what would happen. What I was thinking is that it would be a lot of fun to cruise Disney and go to the parks and have meals and maybe stay at the same hotel with another family or two who was going through what my family was going through, because our son then was in 5th grade by that time, and my daughter was in 7th grade, and it was my husband and I, and we're a pretty small family, and we thought it would be a lot of fun to have maybe a handful of others with us.
And from what I've read and learned about you and your family, your son had been at that time pretty recently diagnosed. Had it been about a year?
He was. When I sent out the email, it had been just a year. He was diagnosed in August of 1998.
Wow. And at the time, too, I imagine message boards were relatively new. It's funny to think about how much things have changed, but at that time, Children with Diabetes was one of the few websites where people could connect.
It was very new, and I was new to using a mailing list or a message board. And when we had left the hospital after Sam was diagnosed, our diabetes educator gave us just a little business card with the Children with Diabetes website on it. And the night we got home, I got online and started exploring a bit, and I joined this friends message board, and that was where I met my very first friends who had kids who had type 1 diabetes. And they became my core group of friends and the people that I relied on and asked questions of, and they are still my friends to this day.
So what happened when you sent out that first message? Was it an immediate, great idea, I'll be there? Or was it more of a slow gathering of people? Because did you really end up with 500 people that first year?
Yeah, it was an interesting process because, of course, there were immediately the people who thought it was a fabulous idea. And yes, of course, I'll go. I'd love to be there. And then you start looking at the finances of it, and a week, or even at that time, a weekend in Disney World is not an inexpensive thing for a family to do. And so a lot of the initial families who expressed interest didn't end up coming, but they were replaced by other families who saw people talking about it online, and then little by little, it really did get some momentum going behind it. And I remember calling Jeff Hitchcock. I didn't know Jeff at the time. I knew he was the president and founder of Children with Diabetes, but I had never met him. I'd never talked to him on the phone. And I called him and said, this is what just happened. And do you think it might be possible for us to call this a Children with Diabetes event and have it under your umbrella? And he said, well, no, Children with Diabetes doesn't do that. We're just a website. And so I continued to bug him. I think I called him 3 or 4 more times. And then by the time we got to the last call, we had several hundred people. And he said, okay, I'll tell you what, if you can get a sponsor so that we can have a meal or a reception or something together under a CWD umbrella so we can call it a CWD event and really have everybody together in one room, then yes, it can be part of CWD.
I laugh because it's hard to picture CWD without Friends for Life or Friends for Life without Children with Diabetes. So the thought of you calling up Jeff and him saying, yeah, no, just made me laugh. But you did get that sponsor.
We did get that sponsor. So I can tell you the short story of the sponsor. I had never called anybody to ask them for money before, and I wasn't comfortable doing it, but I really wanted this event to happen. So I asked Jeff, who should I call? And he gave me a short list. And I just really didn't feel comfortable calling any of those people. I didn't know them. So I thought, I will do my own research. And I went online, and you know how you start with one website and then you connect to another, you get to another, to another, to another. And I ended up at TheraSense, at their webpage. They were a brand new company. They didn't have a product even on the market. And so I clicked on the people who were listed as TheraSense staff, and there were maybe 5 or 6 of them, and there was only one that I thought I could pronounce, and he looked really nice. His name was Steve Bubrick. And so I called him, and I didn't know actually whether his name was Bubrick or Bubrick. And I called him, and I got his voice machine, thank goodness. And he said, "Hi, this is Steve Bubrick. Leave me a message, blah, blah, blah." So I left him a message, and he didn't call me back. And I called again. I left a message, and he didn't call me back. And it was several times. And then finally I left him a message and said, "You know what, I'm not going to continue to bother you. Thank you for listening to our story, and I hope maybe you'll be part of this sometime." He called me back maybe 10 minutes later and said, "I have $10,000 for you. How would that be?"
What?
And I screamed and screeched and just jumping up and down. And to me, that was such an expression of faith in what it is we were doing, because they had nothing on the market.
That's amazing.
They weren't selling anything. So that was their seed money that they were dedicating to us to see this get off the ground. And then that was followed shortly by some other sponsors. I got some courage after I talked to Steve.
Well, you had great success. I mean, who's going to not want to do it after that?
But I have been known to sing to sponsors, and I have a really terrible singing voice. And so I leave voice messages, and I sing to them, and I tell them I won't stop until they call me back. So we ended up with a decent amount of sponsorship that first year, enough to have a day at SeaWorld and a day at Magic Kingdom, where we could pay for the park tickets for people and feed them a meal and get everybody together in one room. And it was an amazing, amazing weekend. And at the end of the weekend, nobody wanted to go home, and people were crying. And, you know, there wasn't the technology like we have now. So there wasn't social media. Long-distance phone calls were expensive. People wrote letters. And we really were thinking it was going to be another year before I see you again. And that was hard, because we had truly made friends for life, and it was our new family.
So fast forward from the olden days of 1999, where you can't, talk over the computer or Skype or have social media. Fast forward then to what Friends for Life is now. What is Friends for Life at this point for people who've not been?
Friends for Life, the best way I can describe it is it's the most giant family reunion you've ever seen. So even if you have never been, and you've never met another person with type 1 diabetes or another family with type 1 diabetes, the first day that you're there, maybe even the first hour that you're there in that hotel with all of those other families, you're home. And for me, that's what it is. It feels like home. It is the best week of the entire year for my family.
Do you enjoy it every year?
What a great question. Yeah, it is my favorite week of the whole year. Thursday is my favorite day of the conference, because that is family and friends banquet on Thursday evening, and everybody who attends comes to that dinner. Sometimes we have a theme, so people are dressed up. Sometimes it's a formal theme, so they're dressed up in gowns or princess and princes, and this year it's a Disney favorites theme, so people are dressing up as their favorite characters or in their favorite themes. So that's my favorite night of the conference, because everyone is together in a very celebratory kind of way. But I think way up there in my favorite list is Tuesday, as people get to the hotel and they have their suitcases and they're walking to the conference area, and they're running down the hall because they see somebody that they haven't seen since last year or the last few months or whatever, and there's screeching and screaming and laughing and crying and hugging and kissing, and it just makes me smile. It's the happiest thing. To me, it's what carries me forward every year. I come home from Friends for Life. I'm exhausted, but I'm also so energized to do a good job, to take care of my family. And I've heard that over and over from people. So I guess what's surprising to me is that every year it doesn't get old. Every year that message is fresh and people come home renewed and with great information and really want to do a good job managing their diabetes, no matter whether they have a young child or they're somebody who has had diabetes for 50 years themselves.
You're listening to Diabetes Connections with Stacey Sims.
You can listen to the whole interview. As I said, I'll link it up. Or you can go to diabetes-connections.com, and there's a search box in the upper right-hand corner. You can put in CWD or FFL or Laura. And a reminder, this interview was conducted a couple of years ago, so the theme she's talking about is different. They have these theme nights, where they have the banquets or different nights for the kids, and you can dress up. If you're listening right now and you're at the conference, do not worry, you didn't bring the wrong outfit. This is from a couple of years ago. Diabetes Connections is brought to you by One Touch. One Touch has been a trusted brand in blood glucose management for more than 30 years. This past year, Pharmacy Times and U.S. News & World Report named One Touch as a #1 pharmacist-recommended brand in blood glucose monitoring devices based on a survey of pharmacists nationwide. Find out more about One Touch brand products at diabetes-connections.com and click on the One Touch logo. A little bit more about children with diabetes. The website is really fascinating. They write up every event in depth. The very first event I went to for them was in 2010. It was called Focus on Technology, and it was here in Charlotte. That's how I got involved with children with diabetes. I came to my town, and I went and checked it out. I learned so much. It really was a turning point in the technology side of our diabetes education. And also, it's fun to go through those write-ups if you have a chance, because you can kind of see how the community has grown and how the technology changed over the years. It's pretty wild stuff. That's really very good record keeping, and kudos to them for that. Last year at Friends for Life, I was very honored to give the closing keynote, my presentation, Diabetes Connections, why we need them, how to make them. It's funny, that presentation predates the podcast. And my passion has always been about connecting in person. So that's one of the talks I give. If you're interested, I'm always happy to travel. Let your JDRF or local diabetes group know that you want to hear that, and I'm happy to come to your town. This year, I am hosting a session called Wait, Don't Poke Me. It's the Diabetes Connections game show. It is based on NPR's Wait, Don't Tell Me, if you've ever heard that show, basically focusing on news and trivia. I have a great panel of friends and Friends for Life faculty helping me out, and we will be broadcasting that as a show in about 2 weeks. It'll be later in July, if all goes well, technically. Never a dull moment around here. If you're actually at Friends for Life, if you're listening to this with enough time to come say hi, the session is on Wednesday. You can check the guidebook for that. But I'll be walking around the whole conference. I am doing a lot at the raffle booth this year. So in the vendor area, that's where I'll be. I'll be hanging out there because I am giving away a Disney fireworks cruise for the Saturday night of the conference. This is going to be a lot of fun. We kind of have a family joke. We go to Disney World once every couple of years. And when my kids were little, none of us could stay up to see the fireworks. I mean, I used to go to bed at 8 o'clock and get up at 2 o'clock in the morning for my job. So it was perfect when my kids were little. We'd all pass out at 7:30 and get up at 6 o'clock in the morning and go to Disney World. We'd always beat the crowds. My poor husband. But as they got older, they weren't really interested in fighting the crowds for fireworks. And I love fireworks. So I never really got to see them up close and personal in Disney World. We were always watching from the side or, from a roller coaster, which is kind of fun too. So this year at Friends for Life, I decided to participate in the auction to raise money for them. And I'm giving away a couple of seats on a fireworks cruise for Saturday night. So we'll be posting pictures of that on social media, and I will finally get my fireworks cruise. I hope it lives up to billing. I'm very excited about this. Okay, in our Know Better segment this week, a little bit more about me. The Facebook group asked some questions, so we started a thread we thought we'd share with you, and it is not all about diabetes. Know Better is brought to you by Know Better Foods. They are delicious, clean, nutritious, yummy foods like bread slices, bread in quotes, of course. They have chocolate chips. They have pasta. They have cookies and muffins. And the bread part is in quotes because they are grain, gluten, wheat, soy, dairy, peanut, yeast free. And they are made with delicious foods, chia, flax, coconuts, almonds, and egg whites. I'm gluten-free since last fall, and they have really helped me through the process. Such good stuff. I'm telling you, the cookies are traveling with me to the Friends for Life conference. I like to travel with those, so I always have something to snack on. Give them a try. You can always use the promo code Stacey10 at checkout to save. The Facebook group has become a really fun place to hang out. Love to see what everybody's posting. Questions, self-promotional stuff, which I love. If you're working on a project and you want to talk about that, bring it on in. It is Diabetes Connections, the group, and I link it up every week in the show notes and also at diabetes-connections.com. You can always click on every episode there to see the show notes. Basically, every link that I talk about is there. It's a good place to go for more information about the guests and the episodes. So, in the Facebook group, I started taking some questions for a quick Ask Me Anything, and I got some really good ones. I will start with Jill. Jill says, wondering how we can move from people with diabetes calling themselves diabetics and others calling them diabetics to just calling them people with diabetes. Just curious what you hear about this kind of labeling out in the field. It's a personal pet peeve of mine. And before I give you my answer, immediately somebody else posted, Judy wrote, and while it might bother some, others aren't bothered at all by it. In my time with T1, it has never bothered me in the least. So my answer on that is twofold. I'll give you the quick, dumb answer first. And that is, on social media, I would much rather say people with diabetes or person with diabetes than diabetic because the abbreviation is easier. Diabetic just looks wrong when you're writing a tweet or something like that. But PWD, easy to type and easy to say. Okay, so that's kind of a jokey answer. This is a sensitive one because there are some people who feel very strongly about it. I don't. In fact, Benny was trying to come up with the name of something the other day, and I kept trying to steer him away from diabetic because there are a lot of people who are very sensitive to it. And he was like, who cares? I have diabetes. I am a diabetic. So to me, this is not a sword to fall on. In my opinion, there are a lot of other language issues around diabetes that I don't like. Non-compliant, control. There are some words that just bleh. I don't like those at all. Diabetic, I get it. I mean, we are not defined by diabetes, right? We don't want to just be, hey, he's a diabetic. I mean, that makes you sound like some kind of robot. You are a person with diabetes. It's just one part of you. But I think to me, it's just more medical shorthand. It's not an insult. And I'm not going to blast somebody who means well, who uses that word. So I guess I'm trying to have it all ways with my answer, but it's not something that kind of makes me cringe as much as so many other things. You know what term I hate? And I don't want to offend any parents out there. I hate the words sugar babies. In a lot of the Facebook groups, a lot of the family and parenting Facebook groups, people will use it as a term of affection or, hey, I need some advice for our sugar babies, or my sugar baby did this or that. I hate that. I find it very infantilizing. It makes it sound like they're immature. It's condescending. I know that's silly because sometimes they're talking about babies and toddlers, certainly. But that was something that it does not roll off my tongue. In fact, it makes me cringe when I hear it. But I get it. Maybe it's because I grew up, isn't that a candy? And it was also a show. Oh my God, here I am showing my age. I remember 100 years ago going to see a Broadway show. Was it Sugar Babes? With Mickey Rooney. I kid you not. I'm going to have to look that up. Yeah, not my thing. So I get it with the words. And I think that the people that you interact with, if we can all kind of respectfully discuss these things, that's really good. But I'm not going to not listen to parenting advice or be friends with somebody or take them seriously because they call their child their sugar baby. Well, maybe I won't take them as seriously in a Facebook post. I mean, but in real life, I think we do have to be careful about judgment there. Okay, so I got a question from Carla who writes, how did you end up in North Carolina? Okay, good question. So many of you know I am originally from New York. I grew up in Yorktown Heights, which is about 30 to 45 minutes north of New York City. It's a suburb of New York City. My parents are from Brooklyn. And when they had kids, like a lot of people, they moved out to the suburbs, and they moved about as far north as you can go and still be in Westchester County, which is the first suburban county outside of New York City. So I grew up in a really nice situation. We were actually close to a couple of farms, but I could ride my bike to town. When I started driving, it was pretty safe. It wasn't a really, really bustling area, but it was a train ride away from New York City. My dad commuted to Manhattan every day. He'd get up, go to the train station, go to New York, come home by dinner. That was the way and where I grew up. And as I got older, it was great because we could take the train into New York City. And we did that often when I was growing up. We'd go see shows like Sugar Babes or whatever it was. But we'd go into New York City, and that was always really exciting. I knew early on that I wanted to go into broadcasting, and I also knew that I wanted to go to Syracuse University. It's a great broadcasting school up there, Newhouse School of Public Communications, blah, blah. And that's where I wanted to go. So, graduated from Yorktown High School and went up to beautiful, balmy Syracuse, New York. It snowed every day my freshman year from October to Christmas break. It really did. That city gets so much snow. Everything you hear about it is true. But what a great place to go to college. So I wound up, I'm getting to how I got to North Carolina. I promise this is how it happened. So I wound up working my senior year of college. I was a weekend radio reporter at WSYR, and I interned at the time it was WSTM TV, the NBC affiliate in Syracuse. After graduation, I got a job in Utica, New York, just a bit east of Syracuse, very tiny city and very tiny television market. But it was a great first job. And that's also where I met my husband. I worked for 6 months at one of the TV stations and then got hired away by the competing station in town 6 months later. That's where Slade was, the competing station where I wound up jumping to. And then Slade and I moved together to Syracuse, back to where I'd been. I got a job doing mornings at the station where I'd been an intern. So that's where I started getting up really early in the morning. Although they tricked me. That job started out going on the air at 6 a.m. But by the time I left, they backed it up. That's the trend now, earlier and earlier. I know a lot of local stations, there are stations that start at 4 a.m., those poor people. But my first job in morning television was a 6 a.m. start and gradually moved back to a 5 a.m. start. After about 3 years of that, we were done. I was tired of getting up in the middle of the night. I was tired of shoveling the snow. And in broadcasting, quite often to move up, to get promoted, you have to move out. Nobody was leaving my station. So I decided to go where my sister was. My sister had moved to Charlotte, North Carolina a couple of years previous because her husband had always heard great things about the city from his dad, who traveled a lot for business, and her husband had gotten a job there, and then she did, and that's where they were. So Slade and I, who were married at this point, drew a big circle, and I applied for jobs in Greenville, South Carolina, Charlotte, and Nashville, Tennessee. And, we looked around and we figured, well, those other two were smaller cities. I'd probably be there for 2 to 3 years and then move again, probably to Charlotte. So why not just start there? And so in the fall of 1999, we picked up and I lived in my sister's guest room for about 2 months. And then we bought a house in the university area of lovely Charlotte, North Carolina. Although at the time, this is one of those cities that just keeps growing. At the time, it wasn't actually part of Charlotte proper. It was like this no man's land. And there wasn't a grocery store nearby. There wasn't a movie theater nearby. And now, almost 20 years later, the place has exploded. It's been crazy to live here. And we actually live just a little bit north of Charlotte. And that's how I got here. Now, how I got from television to radio is another story. We'll save that for another time when somebody asks. But I did work at that station for 3 years. And then, yes, I did end up back to mornings, but at least no snow. I vowed I would get away from mornings, and I only did for 3 years. I wound up back on morning radio, but hey, I did not go back to that Syracuse snow. So I'm very happy about that. All right. That was a long answer, Carla. Thank you for asking that question. Vanessa wants to know, what is your most wanted but so far unattainable interview? Tell us about the challenges and why you want it. I want to interview Supreme Court Justice Sonia Sotomayor. She lives with type 1 diabetes. She's managed it for, I believe, almost 55 years. She was diagnosed as a kid. And I would love to talk about that. Man, she kept her diabetes private for many years. You know, this was at a time, you think about it, and I've heard this from other people who've lived with type 1 for a very long time, or really any disease. You know, you didn't talk about it. It was a secret. It was bad. You didn't want to know. I'd love to talk to her about how that has changed, how she balanced it in her legal career. And then, of course, you know, what she's doing at the Supreme Court. How does she manage lows? You know, when does she check? All that kind of stuff. I'm laying the groundwork for that. I'm going to get this. We're going to track her down and we're going to go through the proper channels. If you know somebody in Washington who might be able to connect me, I'm not above asking for help, but wouldn't that be great? Of course, I'd like to talk to Nick Jonas, but I think most people know his story. And I think that while that would be fun, I'd get tons of listens, I'm sure, from a lot of people who would probably never tune into the show again because they're interested in Nick Jonas and not diabetes. But of course, you know, that would be a fun person to talk to as well. There are a couple people in Hollywood that I've sent notes to, and I'm hoping to get through. Jean Smart, the actress, has type 1. People like that would be fun. But Sonia Sotomayor right now is the person that I want to talk to for sure. I got a couple of questions about news items. Things like the Apple Watch. Will you need a cell plan to get your Dexcom results without the help of the phone? Bobby and Jennifer talked about that. Other questions about, you know, what's going to happen to all the Animas pumps that are no longer in use or being returned. That's from Elaine. Dennis asks about tubing. You know, are other pump companies going to eliminate the tubing? I'll quickly answer those questions the best I can. But again, I'm generally not the news source on these things. I generally ask other people to come on the show and talk about them. So I don't want to give you outdated information. My understanding about Dexcom straight to Apple Watch or Dexcom to, you know, some kind of Fitbit is that this is supposed to be in the works for release in the fourth quarter of this year. Will it happen? We shall wait and see. But I don't know all the details about that. Dexcom has been coming on and talking about it for almost 2 years now. And I know the Fitbit Versa has a Dexcom screen on it. You know, they have Dexcom interaction, but I do not know all of the details. I don't think that they know all the details. So we're going to have to wait and see on that one. In terms of tubing, the Omnipod is the only pump right now, of course, that doesn't have tubing, but the Lilly pump, I saw the prototype earlier this year. Lilly is moving into the pump and pen division of diabetes, not just making insulin. Their pump is starting out life with a very, very short tube. So it'll be placed kind of next to the inset. It sticks to the body too, or you can put it in your pocket, but it does have a tiny tube. But they are talking about coming out with a second version that has no tube. Like the Omnipod, the inset would be right built into the pump. But the Lilly pump, pod, or whatever they're going to call it, actually has a button on it, which is one of my big pet peeves with Omnipod. It would never work for us. You really need to have a button on it where you can give more insulin, only because Benny would lose the PDM in about 3 seconds. I know people love Omnipod. That's great. Fantastic. I'm glad we have options, but that's just not something for us. The Animas pumps, going back to Medtronic, I have no idea. I will ask Medtronic next time I talk to them, and I can ask some of the people I'm going to see at Friends for Life. So I'll see if I can get you an answer on that, Elaine, but I have absolutely no idea. Willa didn't have a question, but she wrote, my daughters love when you interview Benny. Okay, Benny's coming back on the show. I'll tell you a secret. It takes a little time to edit that down because when I interview Benny, for every 3 minutes of kind of making sense, there's about 10 to 15 minutes of rambling. I won't even call it rambling. Let's just call it noise. Chicken noises, fart noises, nonsense, 13-year-old boy stuff that I have to edit out. And I'll keep that. Maybe someday we'll play a blooper reel or just, gosh, but I can't imagine playing that unedited. So it takes me a little bit more time. But we're going to talk to him about summer camp because he's about to go away to his 4 weeks to non-diabetes camp. And I'm going to talk to him about what that's like and the challenges and his advice. So thank you. I love interviewing him. I think it's going to be a really nice record, honestly, when he's older. And even to hear how his voice has changed, at the end of the show where he has that little tag where he talks about, this is a production of Stacey Sims Media. He did that more than 3 years ago. His voice is so different now. So Willa, thank you so much. Jennifer wanted to know, does anybody's kid have pain with the G6 insertion? I can't tell if it's truly painful or if my son is scared about placing it on his belly. Okay, Jennifer, all I'll give you is our experience. Benny has had zero pain with G6. He still coughs. I think I've said this before. He coughs whenever he does an inset or a CGM insertion because he feels that it blocks the pain. And there are studies to support this. We read this a couple of years ago. You can't really cough when you're doing an injection because everything gets all wiggly. And, it's not very safe. I mean, especially if someone else is giving you an injection, I shouldn't laugh. But he finds that works. I will say, putting a G6 or putting any CGM in your belly, especially if you have a really thin kid, can be very painful and scary. I would suggest, I know it is not FDA approved, that you find a different location, maybe back of arm, maybe just move over to like love handle or upper butt or even top of the tush where you can pinch a little bit more. It probably will just be more comfortable if you've got a little bit more fat. That's what most people find. I'll tell you a crazy story. When Benny was little, about tummies. He was tiny, like most little kids. He was very thin. And when we were on injections, he was really thin because he'd just been diagnosed. He was like 30 pounds when he was 21 months old. And by the time he was diagnosed at 23 months old, he was 27 pounds. So he'd significant amount of body weight, for somebody that age, 10% of your body weight. So giving him shots, we mostly used his arms and his butt and his thighs. But I've decided that we needed to rotate and I was going to do it in his tummy. And I am the world's worst injection giver. I was nervous. I mean, it got to be more of a routine, but we were also using syringes because there were no half unit pens. There's certainly no quarter unit pens. And a 27-pound person needs tiny little poofs of insulin. We rarely gave 1 unit at any time. His basal rate on the first pump we got was 0.025 per hour. So crazy stuff. So I put the needle in his stomach. I tell you, it came out the other side. It came through his skin like a piercing, like a belly button ring or something. I put the needle in. I pushed. I'm doing it all in one motion. So I squirted the insulin on myself. I'm a genius. I mean, that was one of the craziest things. I will never forget what that looked like. The look on his face. I can only imagine the look on my face. I'm telling you, diabetes is not for wimps. Last question from the Facebook groups. Anne writes, connection makes us all better. I love this already. What connection would you like to see in the T1D community that could make us all stronger? It's a hard one, but something I've been thinking a lot about. Thank you, Anne. And I have to be honest, Anne's a friend of mine here in the Charlotte community. She's been on the show before, and what a rock star, just a great person and always looking out for other people. I can't say enough nice stuff about her. And she and I talk about connection a lot. I would like to see more in-person connection. I would like to see us move offline where perhaps, feelings are not considered. Tone is hard to determine. Tribes are staked out. Do it my way or you're a moron. Or if you don't do it this way, you're killing your kid or, whatever. I mean, things are said that are very hurtful. I hope you haven't been exposed to that. But let's say I've been in this community for almost 12 years now, and I've been online since pretty much Facebook expanded from college. So I've seen a lot, and I've been the subject of insults. I mean, not so much for the podcast, but just people telling me that I'm nuts. And I think that when you might meet somebody in person, the kindness online increases. So I would like to see more in-person connections. I'd also like to see more healthcare providers wander into the community. I don't know if this is what Anne had in mind, but I took my endo out to dinner with my Facebook group. We have a very good Facebook group that I started a couple of years ago here in the Charlotte community for parents. And I asked my endo, would you come to dinner with us? And about 10 people from the group came and we sat around And connecting with him outside of the office was incredible. He was able to answer questions. He was able to talk to people. It made it a much better experience, I think, the next time that people had to go back and meet with him. And that's something you could do yourself. You know, you don't need anything official. I really am just a mom in this community who says, hey, can you do this? Can you do that? And people come or they don't. And I think that would be terrific. You know, if you have a diabetes educator that you love, take her to coffee, invite other people. This diabetes community, you know, people with type 1, there is an understanding among us that is very unique. And I have yet to come across somebody in our community where I have reached out where they have just said, no, I don't have time, or I can't do that now. Sure. But rejected hasn't happened. And I'd be surprised when it does, because we know that we need each other. We know that nobody gets it like we do. So, Anne, I hope that answers your question. And then selfishly, the other connection I would like to see is my listeners connecting with each other, which is already happening in the Facebook group. All right, that was a terrible plug. Shameless, but go ahead and join the Facebook group, and you too can connect with other fabulous people. Diabetes Connections is also an affiliate of Audible. Audible, where listening is the new reading. And if you sign up today through Diabetes Connections, you get a 30-day free trial from Audible and one free book. Just click the link in the show notes or at diabetes-connections.com. And I am now about to listen to Calypso, which is David Sedaris's latest bunch of short stories. If you're not familiar, David Sedaris is a humorist and an incredible writer. And he's not for everybody. I get it. And it's definitely not for the kids. This is one you cannot listen to with the children. You probably couldn't listen to the last one, the Carrie Fisher book that I read or listened to as well. But this one, David Sedaris' work is not for kids for sure. And I'm excited to read this one because his family spent a lot of time in the Carolinas. And he talked about that when he was growing up. But this one is all about he buys a beach on the Carolina coast. And my understanding is that this book is all about middle age, mortality, what happens when your body betrays you. That's how it's described. So I'm excited to listen to it because I am one who sees a lot of humor in diabetes. And I think I'm going to really enjoy the humor that David Sedaris finds in his own experiences, not with diabetes, but with other health conditions. So again, a free month of Audible and one free download if you just check it out through Diabetes Connections. The links are in the show notes or at the homepage. Oh, okay. Lots of me talking this episode, but back to our regularly formatted show next week. Actually, I'm really excited about next week. We are set to have a roundtable about the show Steel Magnolias and yeah, the movie, but the show is coming to my town, my community theater, and it's a good one, is doing Steel Magnolias. And it made me think, you know, what does that show mean to people with diabetes, to women with diabetes who have children? Because of course the plot of Steel Magnolias is all about a woman with type 1 diabetes who, despite the medical advice against it, has a child and passes away. She dies due to complications from being a type 1 woman who had a child. And the story it's based on a true story, which happened really almost 50 years ago. So we'll talk about it next week on what that means to people now, what they think of the movie and the show, and what I did with my local theater, because I couldn't just let that go by, right? I had to talk to them about it. Anyway, that's next week. Big thank you to my editor, John Buchanan from Audio Editing Solutions. Always doing a great job with this show, even as we are on the road quite a bit this summer. And I'll be bringing you some things from Friends for Life. So please go ahead and follow on social media, because we'll be putting out pictures and hopefully some videos and some live stuff. Stacey Sims, Diabetes Connections, those are the two names everything is under. Stacey Sims on Instagram. It is just the one account on Instagram. And we'll bring you more from Friends for Life, including the game show, in just a couple of weeks. Thank you so much for listening. It is such an honor to bring you this show every week. I really do take this responsibility very seriously. I'm so glad you're here. I'm Stacey Sims. I'll see you back here next week.
Diabetes Connections is a production of Stacey Sims Media. All rights reserved, all wrongs avenged.